Little servant was buried alive under ice and dirt. Apache dug her out barehanded and rowed her to safety. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. On a cold winter's morning, far from the warmth of civilization, a young servant girl found herself struggling to survive in the most extreme conditions. The air was frigid, biting into her skin as she worked outside in the bitter cold, gathering firewood for the cabin. She had been sent by her masters to gather wood from the forest, a task that seemed simple enough. But fate had other plans. As she made her way back to the cabin, a powerful snowstorm rolled in, the winds howling like wolves as they blanketed the land in thick, white powder. Before she knew it, the storm had become so severe, the snow so deep, that she was unable to see where she was going. The icy winds pushed her further off course, and soon, she lost all sense of direction. She stumbled and fell, her body too exhausted to continue. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, the earth beneath her gave way. She fell into a hidden ravine, the sharp ice and heavy snow surrounding her, trapping her deep within the ground. The cold was unbearable, the snow quickly piling on top of her. She could barely breathe, her lungs filling with the freezing air, as she lay buried under the weight of nature's fury. The servant girl's hope began to fade, her thoughts becoming clouded as the snow continued to press down on her. She was certain that this would be her end, alone, trapped, and left to die in the unforgiving wilderness. But then, something miraculous happened. A lone figure appeared, moving through the storm with an agility that defied the blizzard. An Apache warrior, a man of few words, had been tracking through the area when he noticed something strange in the snow. He stopped, his trained eyes scanning the ground for clues. And there, under the thick layer of snow, he spotted the faintest signs of struggle. He knelt down, listening closely for any sound that might indicate life, and that's when he heard it, a faint gasp, a desperate breath. Without hesitation, he began to dig. His hands, calloused from years of survival, worked swiftly through the snow, breaking through the icy crust to reveal the young girl beneath. His heart pounded in his chest as he pulled her from the depths of the earth, her body pale and cold, but still alive. The warrior lifted her gently, his face set in a grim expression as he assessed her condition. He knew that time was of the essence. He placed her carefully onto his horse, securing her tightly to his back as he rode through the storm, his determination unwavering. The storm raged around them, but the warrior pressed on, riding tirelessly through the harsh conditions. Hours passed, and the girl began to stir, her eyes fluttering open as she slowly regained consciousness. She looked up at the man who had saved her, confused and disoriented, but filled with gratitude. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. The warrior simply nodded, his eyes steady as he guided his horse toward the safety of his camp. The girl, exhausted from her ordeal, could barely stay awake, but the warmth of the fire that greeted them when they arrived at the camp was enough to comfort her. The warrior's actions spoke volumes, and in that moment, she realized that she had been saved not just from death, but from a life of servitude and loneliness. She had been given a chance to live, to be free. The warrior tended to her wounds and made sure she was warm, offering her food and shelter as the storm continued to rage outside. She had no idea where this strange journey would take her, but one thing was certain. Her life had been forever changed. She was no longer just a servant. She was someone's responsibility, someone's life to protect. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, she allowed herself to hope again, for the first time in what seemed like forever. The storm had finally subsided, and the first light of dawn filtered through the heavy clouds, casting a soft glow over the snow-covered landscape. The Apache warrior and the young servant girl had reached his camp just as the blizzard began to calm, but the girl's journey was far from over. She lay by the fire, wrapped in furs, her body weak and trembling from the cold, her mind clouded by exhaustion. The warmth of the flames was a comfort, but her thoughts drifted back to the moment when she was buried alive under the snow. and she shuddered as she recalled the suffocating darkness. The warrior, now sitting by the fire, looked over at her, his face unreadable, his eyes flicking from the fire to her. He said nothing, but his presence spoke volumes. She felt a strange sense of gratitude toward him, even though she barely knew him. He had saved her life when no one else had come. He had pulled her from the very edge of death and brought her here, to safety. But now, as she lay there, she wondered what would happen next. She was no longer in the world she had known, no longer the servant girl living in the shadows of her masters. She was in the world of the Apache, surrounded by people who had their own way of life, their own customs, their own rules. And yet, despite the vast difference between her old life and the one she now found herself in, she could not deny that the warrior had done something for her that no one else had ever done. He had shown her kindness. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but one that filled her with an unexpected warmth. The warrior stood up, his movements quiet and precise, and walked over to the fire. He bent down and stirred the flames, adding a few more pieces of wood to keep the fire strong. The girl watched him, her eyes drifting over his features. He was a man of few words, but there was something in the way he carried himself, something in his presence, that made her feel safe. "You are safe here," he finally said, his voice low and steady. The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before, but they had never felt so real. The warrior's gaze shifted toward her, his expression softening. "Rest. You have been through much." His words were simple, but there was a sincerity in them that made her feel like she mattered, like her survival was important to him. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to close her eyes and relax. The sound of the crackling fire filled her ears, and the warmth of the furs surrounding her made her feel protected. She felt her body begin to relax, her muscles unwinding from the tension that had held them captive for so long. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of the wind, but the storm had passed. The world outside was quiet now, peaceful even. It was a strange feeling, this peace, but she welcomed it. The warrior had made sure she was warm and comfortable before he left her side, walking to the edge of the camp. He kept his distance, watching over her, ever vigilant. His role was clear, to protect her. But the girl knew that even in this new world, she would have to prove herself. She could not remain a burden to him forever. The next few days were a blur of recovery and adjustment. The warrior spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He taught her how to survive in the wilderness, how to gather firewood and hunt small game. She learned to recognize the signs of the land, the patterns of nature that the Apache had long known. In return, she shared her knowledge with him. How to cook simple meals, how to care for wounds, how to keep the fire burning in the coldest of nights. Slowly, they grew accustomed to each other, their silent bond growing stronger with each passing day. The warrior had saved her life, but now, she was beginning to feel as though she was contributing, too. She was no longer just a servant. She was an equal, a partner in survival. But even as she began to adjust to this new life, she knew that the world she had left behind, the life of servitude and fear, was not far behind her. She could never forget where she had come from, nor the life she had lost. And the warrior, though kind and honorable, was still a man of his tribe. She had no illusions about where she stood in his world. Still, she could not help but feel a sense of belonging. The warrior had given her something she had never known before: freedom, protection, and respect. And in that, she began to understand something important. Survival was not just about living through the storm. It was about learning to live after the storm had passed. The days passed slowly, and with each one, the girl grew stronger, more accustomed to life with the Apache warrior. Her body healed, the cold of the storm slowly fading from her bones, but her mind still lingered on the events that had brought her here. She thought of the days spent in the cold, the suffocating darkness as she lay buried under the snow. It seemed so far away now, yet it felt like a dream she could not shake. The warrior, though silent, had never wavered in his care for her. He had become her protector, her guide through the harsh wilderness. He taught her not just survival, but how to navigate this new world she had found herself in. But even in the peace of the camp, the girl knew she could not stay in the safety of the warrior's protection forever. There was something else she needed, something more than just survival. She needed to know what lay ahead. She needed to find out who she was now that she was no longer a servant, no longer bound by the rules of her past. One afternoon, after a long day of gathering firewood and small game, the girl sat by the fire, watching the warrior as he worked. He was carving a small figure from wood, his movements deliberate and focused. She admired his skill, how effortlessly his hands shaped the wood, as though he had done it 1,000 times before. She had come to understand that the warrior's quiet demeanor was not one of indifference, but of deep respect for the world around him. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words were measured and wise. "What will happen to me?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The warrior stopped carving and looked at her, his dark eyes studying her intently. He said nothing at first, and the girl wondered if she had overstepped, if her question had been too bold. But then, in his calm voice, he spoke. "You are free now," he said simply, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "What you choose next is yours." The girl swallowed, unsure of how to respond. She had always been told what to do, what was expected of her. She had never been asked to choose for herself. Now, the choice lay before her, but she didn't know what to do with it. She had lived her whole life in fear and servitude, never knowing a moment of true freedom. "But what if I don't know what to choose?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The warrior gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that made her feel like she had just taken a step forward. "You will know," he said. "In time, you will know what path to walk." His words were both reassuring and confusing. She didn't fully understand them, but something in her heart told her he was right. It was up to her now to decide what her life would look like. For the first time in a long while, the girl felt a sense of hope stir within her. She had been given a chance to live her life on her own terms. She could feel the weight of her past slowly lifting, the chains that had bound her for so long loosening with each passing day. Yet, the road ahead was uncertain. She had no family, no name to speak of, no place to return to. The Apache warrior had given her a chance, but it was up to her to take it, to carve out a future for herself. As the days turned into weeks, the girl began to embrace her new life. She helped the warrior with the tasks around the camp, learning the ways of the Apache people, their customs, their language. She became more than just the servant girl she had once been. She was learning to stand on her own, to make her own decisions. Yet, despite the new freedoms she was discovering, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling of being an outsider. The Apache were kind to her, but she knew she was different. She didn't belong to their world, didn't share their history. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of red and orange, the warrior sat beside her by the fire, the crackling flames lighting up his face. "You are ready now," he said. She looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. "Ready for what?" "Ready to join us," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The tribe. You have earned your place here." His words hung in the air, and the girl felt her heart skip a beat. She had known the warrior cared for her, had known he saw something in her. But to be accepted into the tribe, to truly belong to this world, was something she hadn't dared to imagine. For the first time, she felt the weight of her new life settle around her. She was no longer alone. She was no longer a servant. She was part of something bigger, something that had the power to give her a future. But with this new life came a new responsibility. The tribe had accepted her, but they would expect something in return. She was no longer just the girl who had been rescued. She was now a part of the Apache, a people who had lived and fought for their land for generations. And though she didn't yet fully understand the gravity of what that meant, she knew that her life had been forever changed. She was no longer the girl buried under the snow. She was a woman reborn, with a future that was hers to create. The days in the Apache camp grew warmer as spring slowly began to melt away the remnants of the harsh winter. The young girl, now a woman in her own right, stood by the fire one evening, her hands resting on the rough-hewn wood of the shelter as she watched the flickering flames dance. Her mind was filled with thoughts that had been building over the past few weeks, since the warrior had told her that she was ready to join the tribe. It was an honor, something many had not received, but it also came with a heavy weight. She had come from nothing, a mere servant lost in the vast world, but now, she was being asked to embrace something much larger than herself. The choice was clear, but not simple. She had spent her entire life on the outside, on the periphery, and even though the tribe had accepted her, she still felt like an outsider. The Apache had their own customs, their own way of life, and as much as they had shown her kindness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she would always be different. That night, the warrior who had saved her from the storm approached her by the fire. His presence was silent but strong, and as he stood next to her, she felt a deep connection between them, one that had grown over the weeks they had spent together. She had come to respect him, not just for his strength but for his wisdom, and for the way he had shown her what it meant to survive. But now, more than ever, she needed his guidance. "I have been thinking," she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "What does it mean to be part of your tribe? What does it mean for me?" The warrior looked at her with the same calm expression he always wore, his eyes thoughtful, as though he was weighing her words carefully. "It means that you belong. Not just to us, but to the land," he said, his voice low. "It means that you carry the spirit of our people with you, and you protect it, just as we do." She listened intently, feeling the weight of his words. The idea of belonging, truly belonging to something, was a strange one for her. She had always been on the fringes of society, never fully accepted by those around her. But now, in this camp, surrounded by the Apache, she felt as though she was on the edge of something greater. "But I don't know if I am ready," she admitted quietly, her gaze drifting to the campfire, the shadows of the flames flickering in her eyes. "I don't know if I can be who you expect me to be." The warrior stepped closer, his expression softening, though his words were firm. "You are ready," he said. "The spirit of the land is in you. You do not have to prove anything. You just need to accept it." She felt the truth of his words seep into her heart, and for the first time, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't need to be anyone other than herself. She just needed to step forward and claim her place. The next few days were spent preparing for the ceremony. The girl, now no longer a mere servant, but a woman who had come to understand the Apache way of life, was guided by the warrior and others in the tribe to learn the rituals, the traditions, and what it meant to be a part of the Apache family. It was not an easy process, and there were moments of doubt, but with each passing day, she felt herself grow stronger. She learned the language of the tribe, the songs, the dances, and the stories that had been passed down for generations. Her connection to the Apache deepened, and as she embraced their culture, she found herself shedding the last remnants of the life she had once known. It was on the morning of the ceremony that she stood before the tribe, her heart pounding in her chest. The warrior, now standing beside her, gave her a brief nod of encouragement. She stepped forward, her head held high, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. The tribe gathered around, their faces solemn, but filled with respect. The chief, an elder with years of wisdom in his eyes, approached her. "You have walked through the fire," he said, his voice carrying the weight of history. "You have proven yourself, not by your birth, but by your actions. Today, you are one of us." With those words, the girl, now a woman, was accepted into the tribe. It was a simple ceremony, but to her, it meant everything. She had found her place in a world she had never known, surrounded by people who cared for her and accepted her for who she was. The warrior who had saved her life stood behind her, his presence unwavering, and for the first time, she felt truly at home. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars shone brightly above, the girl sat by the fire, surrounded by her new family. The warrior sat beside her, and for the first time, they shared a moment of silence, each understanding that their bond was now unbreakable. She had been saved, not just from death, but from a life of loneliness and fear. And now, as a part of the Apache tribe, she was finally free to live the life she had always dreamed of, one of strength, respect, and belonging. The days in the Apache camp grew warmer as spring slowly began to melt away the remnants of the harsh winter. The young woman, now fully integrated into the tribe, woke early each morning with a sense of purpose. The cold mornings that had once seemed endless had given way to the soft warmth of the sun, and with it, a new chapter of her life. She had come a long way from the frightened servant girl who had been buried alive in the snow. Now, she was part of something much larger than herself, a family, a tribe that had accepted her as one of their own. But even as the days grew warmer, her mind often wandered to the future. The warrior who had saved her life, the man who had become her protector, had been distant in recent days. He remained as quiet as ever, but there was something different in his demeanor. It was subtle, but she could feel the shift. It was as though he had been preparing her for something she couldn't yet understand. One evening, as the camp settled down and the sound of the evening fire crackled in the distance, the warrior approached her. His steps were purposeful, and she couldn't help but feel a growing tension in the air. "You have become a part of our people," he said, his voice as steady as ever, though she could hear a hint of something deeper in his words. "You have learned our ways, and you have shown strength." The young woman nodded, grateful for his guidance, but still unsure of where this conversation was leading. "But there is something you must understand," the warrior continued. "The Apache live by honor, by respect for one another, and by the bond we share with the land. You have earned the respect of our tribe, but there is more to your place here than what you know." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and for the first time, the young woman felt the weight of what it truly meant to be part of the Apache people. She had thought that by simply joining them, she had found her place, but now she understood that there was more to it than just survival. She had to prove herself, not just to the tribe, but to herself as well. The warrior stood silently for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. Then, without looking at her, he said, "There are trials ahead, and you must be ready. The land will test you. The tribe will test you." She felt a knot form in her stomach. The warrior was never one to speak in riddles, but there was something in his tone now that unsettled her. "What kind of trials?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The warrior turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "The land chooses those who will remain," he said. "You will face challenges that will push you to your limits. You will need to decide what kind of Apache you will be." The words resonated deep within her, stirring something fierce inside. She had never shied away from a challenge, but she also knew that her journey was far from over. The warrior's words were a reminder that this life she had chosen, this new family, was not something that could be taken for granted. She had to earn it every day. The next morning, the warrior led her to the outskirts of the camp, where the land stretched out before them, vast and untamed. The wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of earth and wild grasses. She stood at the edge of the camp, feeling the weight of the world in a way she had never known before. The warrior handed her a bow, his fingers brushing hers as he passed it to her. "Today, you will prove that you are ready," he said. "You will track and hunt." The young woman nodded, taking the bow in her hands. It felt natural, the weight of it familiar, as though it had always been a part of her. She had learned the ways of the Apache, how to move silently through the wilderness, how to read the signs of the land, and how to hunt. But this would be different. This was not just about survival. It was about proving that she belonged. The warrior watched her as she prepared to leave, his gaze steady but filled with something deeper. "The land does not care who you were," he said. "It only cares who you are now." She understood his words, and as she ventured into the wilderness, she felt a sense of clarity. This was her moment to prove that she was not the scared servant girl she had once been. She was an Apache now, and nothing, not the past, not the fears, could hold her back. Hours passed as she tracked her prey, moving quietly through the brush, listening to the sounds of the forest. She was attuned to every shift in the wind, every snap of a twig beneath her feet. Her heart raced with anticipation as she spotted her quarry. In the distance, a deer, grazing near a stream, unaware of her presence. She crept closer, every movement calculated, every breath measured. The young woman's focus was absolute. She had trained for this moment, and now it was time to prove her worth. She raised the bow, her fingers steady as she drew the string back, her aim true. In one swift motion, she released the arrow, and it flew through the air, striking the deer with precision. The animal fell to the ground, its life ended in an instant. She stood still for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, the reality of what she had done sinking in. She had hunted, not just for survival, but to claim her place in this new world. The land had tested her, and she had succeeded. As she made her way back to the camp with her prize, the warrior stood waiting. His expression was unchanged, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. "You are ready," he said simply. And in that moment, she knew that she had finally found her place. She had earned it. The days passed by with a rhythm that was now familiar to her. The girl, once a servant, now a woman of the Apache tribe, had found her place in the world. She had proven herself with the hunt, had earned the respect of the warrior who had saved her life, and had been accepted by the tribe. But even with all this, something inside her still felt unsettled. The land, the tribe, the new life she had embraced, they had all given her a sense of belonging. Yet, in her heart, she knew there was more to this journey than just survival. There were questions that needed answering, things she had yet to understand. One afternoon, after a long day spent training in the wilderness with the warrior, she sat by the fire, gazing into the flickering flames. The warrior, as always, sat beside her, silent but ever watchful. The fire cast long shadows across their faces, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath. It was in this stillness that she decided to ask the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "What do you see in me?" she asked, her voice soft, unsure if she truly wanted the answer. The warrior turned to her, his expression unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, but she knew him well enough to see that he was thinking carefully. "I see strength," he said at last, his voice low. "Strength that was always inside you, but it was buried. You had to fight to find it. You are more than what you were. You are one of us now." His words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She felt a mixture of pride and confusion. She had always been strong, hadn't she? The strength to survive, the strength to endure the hardship of her past, the strength to keep going even when everything seemed lost. But was that the same strength the warrior spoke of? Was she truly one of them, or was she just pretending to be? "I never chose this," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice surprising even herself. "I never asked for this life. I was never meant to be one of you." The warrior remained silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Then, finally, he spoke. "You didn't need to choose," he said simply. "The land chose you. We chose you." His words carried weight, and as they settled in her heart, she realized the truth of what he was saying. She had never needed to choose this life. It had always been waiting for her, even when she had no idea it existed. The Apache had given her a chance, and she had taken it, not just because she had to, but because deep down, she had wanted to. She had wanted to find something more than the endless struggle of her past. She had wanted to find peace, to find a place where she was more than just a servant, where she could stand on her own, as an equal. And now, she had that. As the days turned into weeks, the girl continued to grow into her new life. She learned more of the Apache ways, of their connection to the land, and their deep respect for nature. She learned how to hunt with precision, how to track with the quiet steps of a warrior, and how to live in harmony with the world around her. But despite all this, she still found herself struggling with a sense of displacement. She was accepted, yes, but the question lingered, did she truly belong? The warrior, sensing her inner turmoil, took her aside one evening, leading her away from the camp to a quiet spot by a fast-moving stream. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was calming, a sharp contrast to the storm inside her. He sat beside her, and for once, he spoke more than a few words. "You think you are not one of us," he said quietly, his voice steady, but filled with understanding. "You think you are still that girl who was buried under the snow, that girl who had no future, no place. But I see you. You are not that girl anymore." She looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of his words. "I don't know who I am now," she admitted. "I don't know where I belong." The warrior placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring but firm. "You belong here," he said. "Not because you were saved, not because you are a woman, but because you have the spirit of the land within you. You are Apache, whether you see it or not. You have been chosen. You have been given a gift, and it is time for you to accept it." His words, simple as they were, hit her like a thunderclap. She had always thought of herself as an outsider, someone who had stumbled into this life by chance. But the warrior was right. She had been chosen, not by the tribe, but by the land itself. It had accepted her, embraced her, and now it was time for her to embrace it in return. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the warrior's words settle deep within her. In that moment, she understood. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She had already done that. What she needed now was to believe in herself, to trust that the land had chosen her for a reason. And with that, the final piece of her journey fell into place. She was no longer a servant. She was no longer a stranger. She was Apache, and she was ready to live like one. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, As the young woman stood on the edge of the clearing, staring into the vast expanse of the wilderness before her, the fire crackled softly behind her, the warmth of the flames a stark contrast to the cool breeze that swept through the trees. It was the perfect moment for reflection, a time to consider all that she had learned, all that she had become. Her journey with the Apache had not been easy, but it had shaped her into someone she hardly recognized, someone she could finally be proud of. She had faced the trials of the land, had proved her strength in the hunt, and had earned her place within the tribe. Yet, there was still something lingering in the depths of her heart, something she had yet to confront. The warrior, always watchful, had noticed the change in her. She had become more confident, more at ease with herself, but there was still a restlessness in her eyes that hadn't gone unnoticed. He approached her now, his steps silent, as always, until he was standing beside her. "What troubles you?" he asked, his voice low, but filled with understanding. She turned to him, her face soft with the weight of unspoken thoughts. "I have learned so much, but I still wonder if I am truly ready," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Ready for what?" the warrior asked, his brow furrowing slightly, as though he was anticipating her answer. "Ready to be a part of the tribe," she replied. "Ready to walk the path that the land has chosen for me." The warrior stood silently for a moment, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. Then, he spoke, his voice filled with the quiet strength that had guided her from the beginning. "You are already a part of the tribe. You have walked the path and proven yourself. The land has chosen you, and we have chosen you." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of tradition, years of wisdom passed down through generations. The young woman felt a deep sense of peace settle over her as the warrior spoke. She had known, deep down, that this was true. She had already earned her place in the tribe, not just through her actions, but through the way she had embraced the Apache way of life. She had learned to live in harmony with the land, to respect its power and its beauty. But still, a small part of her had hesitated, had questioned whether she was truly ready to leave behind everything. She had known. "Then why do I still feel like I am standing on the edge?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The warrior looked at her for a long moment, as though searching for the right words. "Because the edge is where all new beginnings start," he said finally. "You are standing on the edge of your new life. It is not something to fear. It is something to embrace." His words resonated deep within her, like a spark catching in the wind. She had feared the unknown for so long, but now she realized that it was not the unknown that should scare her. It was the fear of not stepping forward, of staying in the shadows, of never truly living. "The tribe has accepted you," the warrior continued, his voice steady. "But it is not the tribe you must prove yourself to. It is yourself." His words hit her like a bolt of lightning, clearing away the last remnants of doubt in her heart. She had always felt like she was trying to prove something, to be someone worthy of the tribe's respect, of the land's gift. But now she understood. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She needed to prove it to herself. The warrior's hand, strong and steady, rested on her shoulder. "You are ready," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have already chosen the path. Now walk it." His touch was warm, and in that moment, she felt a sense of belonging that she had never felt before. The weight of her past, the fear of not being enough, lifted from her shoulders. The land had chosen her, the tribe had chosen her, and now, she was ready to choose herself. The next day, the young woman set off into the wilderness with the warrior, her bow slung across her back and her heart full of purpose. She had learned everything she needed to know about the Apache way of life, but this journey, this trial, would be the final test. It was not about survival. It was about living, truly living, in the way the Apache did, connected to the land, to each other, and to the spirit of their ancestors. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, she felt the call of the land, its rhythm in her blood, its heartbeat in the earth beneath her feet. She was no longer just a servant, no longer a girl lost in the world. She was an Apache, and this was her home. The days that followed were filled with trials, each one pushing her further, challenging her in ways she had never imagined. But with each challenge, she grew stronger, more confident in her place within the tribe. The warrior was always by her side, guiding her with quiet wisdom, but it was clear now that she no longer needed his constant guidance. She had become the woman she had always dreamed of being. And as the sun set on the final day of her trial, she stood before the warrior, her heart full, knowing that she had passed the test. She was no longer standing on the edge. She had stepped forward, and in doing so, she had found her place in the world, her place in the Apache tribe, her place in the land. The days that followed her trial were filled with a new sense of purpose. The young woman had proven herself to the Apache tribe, and the warrior's words echoed in her mind. You have chosen your path. It was not just the survival of the fittest that mattered here. It was about embracing what the land and the tribe had to offer and becoming part of it in every way. She had walked the path of the Apache and had learned the way of the land. The next chapter of her life was unfolding, and it was more than she had ever imagined. She had faced the wilderness, had hunted with precision, and had earned the trust of the tribe. She had become a true Apache. But with that came a new challenge, one that required her to make a choice not just about who she was, but about how she would fit into the world that was now her home. One morning, as the sun rose over the camp, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the warrior approached her. His gaze was as steady as ever, but there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes. It is time, he said simply. She nodded, the weight of the words settling over her. She had been prepared for this moment, yet the anticipation stirred something deep within her. It was time for her to take the next step, to fully embrace her place in the tribe. But how could she know if she was truly ready for what came next? The warrior did not speak again as they walked through the camp. The people of the tribe were going about their daily tasks, but there was an unspoken understanding that something important was happening. They reached the center of the camp, where the elder, the chief, was waiting. His eyes, filled with years of wisdom, studied her for a long moment. She stood tall, feeling the weight of his gaze, but her resolve was unwavering. She had made her choice. She was Apache now, in heart and spirit. You have learned much, the chief said, his voice steady but filled with respect. You have walked the path. Now, you must choose your role. The young woman's heart quickened. She had known that this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. What role do you see for me? She asked, her voice steady, though a flutter of doubt lingered. The chief's eyes softened. You must decide, he said. Do you wish to become a protector of the land, a warrior who defends your people, or do you seek another path? The choice is yours. The young woman's mind raced. She had already proven herself in the wild, in the hunt, and in the trials that had tested her strength. But now, she was being asked to make a decision that would shape her future forever. She could feel the weight of the land beneath her feet, the pulse of the earth that connected her to the Apache. She had become part of something much bigger than herself. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She had been given a gift, a chance to live the life she had always dreamed of. But what kind of life did she want? The warrior, standing by her side, said nothing, but his presence was a steady reminder of the choices before her. He had shown her what it meant to live with honor, to protect the land and the people. She had seen his strength, his silent determination. He had led by example, and now, she knew what she had to do. She turned to the chief and spoke, her voice filled with quiet determination. I choose to become a protector, she said, her words clear and firm. I will defend the land, the tribe, and the way of life that has been given to me. The chief nodded, his face proud but solemn. Then you will train with the warriors, and you will learn what it means to defend our people. But remember, true strength comes not just from the ability to fight, but from the wisdom to know when to fight. The young woman nodded, understanding the weight of the chief's words. She had chosen her path, and now she would walk it with the knowledge that it was not just about battle, but about balance, respect, and protection. The warrior, who had watched her closely, stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. You have made the right choice, he said, his voice soft but filled with pride. But remember, the greatest battles are not always fought with weapons. They are fought with the strength of your heart, with your willingness to protect those you love, and to honor the land that sustains you. His words were a final reminder that her journey was not just about physical strength, but about the courage to stand for what was right. Over the following weeks, she began her training as a warrior. The Apache did not simply teach her how to fight. They taught her how to live with the land, to understand its rhythms, its needs, and to honor it with every action. She learned to move with the silence of the wind, to strike with the speed of the eagle, and to defend with the unwavering courage of the Apache spirit. But the true test of her strength came not in the practice, but in the choices she made along the way. As the seasons changed, she began to see herself as a protector, not just of the land, but of her people, of the family she had come to love. The warrior had been right. The greatest strength did not lie in her ability to fight, but in her ability to lead with honor and wisdom. And in that strength, she found peace. The days grew warmer as spring fully arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The young woman, now fully integrated into the Apache tribe, spent her days training as a warrior. She was no longer the frightened girl who had once been buried under snow, struggling for survival. Now, she was strong, confident, and determined to protect the people who had given her a second chance at life. But even as she trained and honed her skills, there was a growing sense of unrest within her. She had found her place in the tribe, and she was proud of the path she had chosen. However, she could not ignore the whispers of something larger, something more dangerous that was approaching. It was as if the land itself was speaking to her, warning her of an impending threat. It was not just the challenge of surviving in the wilderness that worried her now. It was the uncertainty of the world beyond the tribe, the dangers that loomed on the horizon, and the realization that the Apache way of life was constantly under threat from forces that sought to destroy it. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the camp, the warrior who had become her mentor approached her. His expression was serious, and there was a tension in the air that was hard to ignore. "You have learned much," he said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying sense of urgency. "But there is more you must understand. The time has come for you to prove yourself in a way you have not yet done." The young woman felt a knot form in her stomach. She had faced many trials, but this was different. She knew that the warrior was speaking of something far beyond what she had trained for. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The warrior looked out across the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon, as though he could see the danger approaching even now. "The Apache are not just a people of the land," he said. "We are protectors of the land, the keepers of its spirit. But there are those who wish to take that away from us, to destroy what we hold dear. There are those who seek to drive us from our land, to erase our way of life." The young woman listened closely, her heart racing as she realized the weight of his words. She had always known that the Apache lived with the constant threat of danger, but she had never fully understood what that truly meant. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with the need for answers. The warrior turned to face her, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "We fight," he said simply. "We defend our land, our people, and our way of life. It is not just about survival anymore. It is about preserving everything that we are." The young woman felt a fire ignite within her. She had been trained for this moment, but now, the reality of it hit her full force. It was not just about hunting or surviving in the wilderness. It was about protecting what she had come to love, what she had come to believe in. The Apache were not just a tribe to her now. They were her family, her home. She had a duty to defend them, just as they had defended her. The warrior nodded, sensing her resolve. "You will fight alongside us," he said. "You will protect the land, and you will prove that you are ready to stand with the warriors of the Apache." The young woman nodded, her heart pounding with determination. She had chosen this life, and now, she would prove that she was worthy of it. The next few days were filled with preparation. The young woman trained harder than ever before, honing her skills with a focus and intensity she had never known. She worked with the warriors, learning the ways of battle, of defending the tribe against those who would harm it. The warrior was by her side, guiding her every step of the way, but she could feel herself growing stronger with each passing day. She was no longer the girl who had been buried under the snow. She was a warrior, ready to face whatever came her way. One morning, as the sun rose over the camp, the young woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon. The warriors had gathered, preparing for the coming battle, and she could feel the weight of the moment settling over her. The land had chosen her, the tribe had chosen her, and now, it was her turn to choose. She was ready. She turned to the warrior, her mentor, and met his gaze. There was no need for words. He could see the determination in her eyes, the strength in her stance. She was ready to fight for the Apache, to fight for the land that had become her home. As the warriors mounted their horses and rode toward the battle, the young woman rode alongside them, her heart filled with a fierce resolve. This was her fight now. The time for hesitation was over. She was no longer an outsider. She was Apache, and she would defend her people with everything she had. The battle was fierce, and the warriors fought with all the strength they had. But the young woman held her ground, fighting with the same courage and determination she had learned from the Apache. She moved with precision, striking with the strength of the land itself. It was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything they held dear. And when the dust settled, the Apache had won. The land was theirs, and the young woman had proven that she was not just a warrior in name, but in heart and spirit. She had earned her place among the warriors of the Apache, and she knew, without a doubt, that this was where she truly belonged. The battle had been won, but the young woman could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She had fought fiercely alongside the Apache warriors, her arrows flying true and her strikes precise. She had stood her ground, proven her strength, and earned the respect of her people. But as the dust began to settle and the smoke cleared, a deeper sense of unease crept into her heart. The land had been defended, but the forces that threatened the Apache were not easily defeated. The warriors rode back to the camp, their faces set, their eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. She rode beside them, feeling the weight of the moment. She had proven herself as a warrior, but the question still lingered in her mind. What would come next? The following days were filled with a somber quiet. The tribes celebrated their victory, but there was no time for rest. The threat was still out there, and the Apache knew they could not afford to be complacent. The chief, the wise elder who had welcomed her into the tribe, called for a council. The young woman joined the warriors and the leaders of the tribe around the fire, the crackling flames casting shadows on their faces. The air was thick with tension, and she could sense that something important was about to be decided. The chief's voice broke the silence. We have won this battle, but the enemy will return. We must prepare ourselves for what lies ahead. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of experience. The young woman listened closely, feeling the responsibility of her new role settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a servant girl who had been saved. She was part of the tribe, part of the fight for their survival. What will we do? She asked, her voice steady but filled with the urgency she felt in her heart. The chief turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. We will stand together, as we always have, he said. But we must also be ready for the next step. The enemy is not just a group of men. It is a force that seeks to destroy everything we stand for. We must defend our land, our people, and our way of life. But we must also prepare for the future. The young woman understood what he was saying. This was not just about fighting battles. It was about preserving everything that the Apache held dear. It was about ensuring that their way of life would survive for generations to come. What can I do? She asked, her heart swelling with a sense of duty. The chief smiled, a rare and knowing smile. You have already done much. But now, you must take on a new role. You will lead, not just in battle, but in the protection of our people. You will help guide the next generation of warriors. His words took her by surprise. She had always seen herself as a soldier, a defender, but now, she was being asked to take on a leadership role. It was a responsibility she had not expected, but one she felt ready to embrace. The warrior who had mentored her stood behind her, his gaze steady. He had always been her guide, her teacher, and now, he was entrusting her with the future of the Apache people. You are ready, he said quietly. You have proven yourself in battle, but now you must prove yourself as a leader. The tribe will follow you, just as they have followed me. The young woman felt a surge of pride, but also a deep sense of fear. To lead the Apache was no small task. It was not just about being strong in battle. It was about being strong in every way, about guiding the tribe through difficult times, about ensuring that their legacy lived on. But as the words of the warrior echoed in her mind, she realized that she had already taken the first step. She had chosen this path, and now, it was her turn to lead. The days that followed were filled with preparations for the future. The young woman worked alongside the warriors, helping to train the next generation of Apache fighters. She taught them the skills she had learned, the art of the bow and arrow, the tactics of hunting and tracking, and the importance of staying connected to the land. She also spent time with the tribe's leaders, learning from their wisdom and understanding the deeper aspects of Apache life. As she worked and trained, she began to see herself not just as a warrior, but as a protector of the tribe's future. She was no longer just defending the land from invaders. She was helping to shape the tribe's destiny, ensuring that the Apache way of life would survive and thrive for generations to come. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the camp, the chief called for a gathering. The young woman stood with the warriors, her heart swelling with pride as she looked out at the tribe that had become her family. The chief's voice rang out, steady and strong. "We have faced many trials, but we will face more. Our strength lies in our unity, in our ability to stand together, to fight for each other, and to honor the land that gives us life." The young woman's gaze shifted to the horizon, the same horizon she had once feared. Now, it seemed full of promise. She was ready to lead, ready to defend the tribe, ready to honor the legacy of the Apache. She had come a long way from the girl who had been buried under the snow. Now, she was a warrior, a protector, and a leader, and the future was hers to shape. The camp had settled into a quiet rhythm, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and earth. The young woman, now a respected warrior, stood by the edge of the forest, her eyes scanning the horizon. It was a moment of peace, a brief lull between the storms that always seemed to follow the Apache. Yet, despite the calm, something stirred within her, a restless sense that the true test was still ahead. Her training had been intense, her leadership role within the tribe growing day by day. She had taken her place among the warriors, guiding the younger generation, teaching them the ways of the land, and preparing them for the battles that she knew would come. But now, more than ever, she felt the weight of her responsibility. The tribe had faced many threats in the past, but the dangers they now faced were different. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their very way of life, their traditions, and the land that had given them everything. She had seen the signs, the whispers of a growing force that threatened to disrupt the balance they had fought so hard to maintain. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the camp, the chief called for a gathering. The young woman joined the warriors around the fire, her heart beating steadily in her chest. The chief, his face weathered by years of wisdom and hardship, stood tall, his eyes scanning the group. He did not speak immediately, but the weight of his presence commanded attention. "The time has come," the chief said finally, his voice steady, though it carried an edge of something deeper. "The threats we have been hearing about are no longer whispers. They are real, and they are closing in on us." The young woman felt a chill run down her spine. She had known the dangers were coming, but hearing the chief confirm it made the reality set in. "We are not the only ones who want this land," the chief continued. "There are those who would seek to take it from us, to erase our people, our ways, our history. We have fought before, but now, we must fight harder than ever before." His words resonated deep within the young woman. She had come to understand the Apache way of life in a way she had never imagined, and now, the thought of losing it felt like a personal blow. She had made her place here, and she would not let anyone take it from her or her people. The chief looked directly at her, his gaze intense. "You have proven yourself, warrior. You have led our people in battle, and you have earned the respect of our tribe. But now, it is time for you to step forward and lead in a way you have not yet done. The future of the Apache rests in your hands." The young woman's heart swelled with pride, but there was also a deep sense of fear. She had always known that leadership came with great responsibility, but the magnitude of what was being asked of her was overwhelming. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with the weight of her uncertainty. The chief paused for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "You must unite the tribe," he said, his voice firm. "The time has come for us to stand together as one. We must fight as one, or we will fall divided. There are forces out there who seek to destroy us, and we must be ready to defend not just our land, but everything we hold dear." The young woman nodded, her resolve hardening. She had faced countless challenges already, but this was something different. This was not just about battle. This was about leading her people through a time of crisis. She had been given the chance to prove herself as a warrior, and now, she was being asked to prove herself as a leader. As the days passed, the young woman worked tirelessly, gathering the warriors, speaking with the elders, and preparing the tribe for what lay ahead. She knew the battle would not be easy, but she also knew that the Apache were not easily defeated. They had survived for generations, living in harmony with the land, and they would fight to protect that way of life. She spent her nights walking the land, feeling the earth beneath her feet, listening to the wind that spoke of ancient battles, of ancestors who had fought and died for the land. She could feel their presence, their strength, and their courage coursing through her. She was not alone in this fight. As the day of the battle approached, the tribe gathered in the clearing, their faces set with determination. The young woman stood at the front, her bow in hand, her body poised for the fight ahead. The warriors stood behind her, ready to follow her lead. She had earned their respect, and now they would fight with her, and for the future of the Apache. The air was thick with anticipation as the enemy approached, their shadows creeping closer to the camp. The young woman's heart raced, but she did not falter. She had led her people through many trials, and she would lead them through this one as well. She could feel the weight of the land beneath her feet, the strength of her ancestors in her blood, and the power of the Apache's spirit in her soul. This was her moment, the moment she had been training for, the moment she would prove to herself and to the tribe that she was not just a warrior, but a leader. The battle was fierce, but the Apache fought with everything they had. They fought for their land, for their future, and for each other. The young woman led them with the wisdom and strength she had learned over the years, her arrows striking true and her commands unwavering. When the dust settled and the enemy was defeated, the tribe stood victorious. The young woman had led them to victory, not just through strength and skill, but through unity, determination, and the belief that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. As the tribe gathered around the fire that night, the chief stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. "You have proven yourself, warrior," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You have led our people to victory. The Apache will live on, because of you." The young woman stood tall, her heart swelling with pride, but there was no time to rest. The fight was never over. The future of the Apache was in her hands, and she was ready to continue the fight, to protect her people, and to honor the legacy of the land that had chosen her. The weeks following the battle were filled with reflection and quiet determination. The young woman had led the Apache tribe through a fierce confrontation, and while their victory had been hard-earned, she knew that it was not the end of their struggles. The world beyond the tribe's camp was still filled with danger, and the enemy they had fought against was only one of many that lurked in the shadows. As the days passed, the weight of leadership began to settle on her shoulders in a way that she hadn't expected. She had always been a warrior, a fighter, but leading her people was a different challenge altogether. Every decision, every action, had the power to affect the future of the Apache. There was no room for hesitation. The chief, who had once welcomed her into the tribe with open arms, now looked to her with a sense of respect that she could not deny. She had proven herself in battle, but now, she had to prove herself in every other way. The warrior who had trained her, who had guided her through the trials, stood by her side, but even he could see that she was struggling with the weight of what lay ahead. "You have already done more than anyone could have asked," he said one evening, his voice steady as he sat next to her by the fire. "But now, the hardest part is learning how to guide others." His words were simple, yet they struck deep within her. She had never been one to lead by words. She had always believed that action spoke louder. But now, she was learning that leadership required more than strength on the battlefield. It required wisdom, patience, and the ability to see beyond the present moment. "I don't know if I'm ready," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. The warrior looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "You are ready," he said. "The land has chosen you. The tribe has chosen you. The only thing left is for you to choose yourself." His words were a reminder that she had already made the hardest decision. She had chosen this path, and now it was time to walk it with confidence. As the days passed, the young woman began to embrace her role as a leader. She spent time with the elders, learning the deep traditions of the Apache people, the stories, the songs, the rituals that had been passed down through generations. She met with the warriors, guiding them, helping them sharpen their skills, and teaching them not just how to fight, but how to live as Apache. The tribe had become her family, and her role within it was more than just a warrior. She was a protector, a teacher, and a leader. But even as she grew in strength and wisdom, she could not ignore the threat that still loomed on the horizon. The enemy that had attacked them was not gone. It was only a matter of time before they would return. The Apache had survived many battles, but this would be different. The tribe was smaller now, their numbers thinned by years of conflict and struggle. They could not afford to lose anymore. The young woman knew this. She had learned that leadership was not just about fighting. It was about protecting those who depended on her. It was about ensuring that the Apache way of life would endure, no matter the cost. One day, as the sun hung low in the sky, the chief called a council meeting. The young woman stood at the front, her posture strong, her heart filled with resolve. The warriors and elders gathered around the fire, their faces grim as the chief spoke. The time has come for us to prepare for what is to come. The enemy will return. We must be ready. The words were heavy, but they were not spoken in fear. They were spoken with the quiet determination that the Apache had always known. The young woman stood silent, her mind racing. She knew what needed to be done. They had to fight, but they had to fight on their own terms. They could not afford to be caught off guard again. We must take the fight to them, she said, her voice steady and firm. The chief nodded, his approval clear in his eyes. You speak wisely, he said. We will strike before they can organize their forces. We will protect our people, no matter the cost. The young woman's heart swelled with pride. She had proven herself on the battlefield, but now, she was proving herself as a leader. She had found her place, not just as a warrior, but as someone who could guide her people through the toughest of times. Over the following days, the tribe prepared for the inevitable conflict. The young woman worked tirelessly, organizing the warriors, strengthening their defenses, and making sure that every member of the tribe knew their role in the coming battle. She spent time with the children, teaching them the ways of the Apache, ensuring that the future of their people would be just as strong as their past. She spent nights by the fire with the elders, listening to their stories, learning their wisdom, and understanding what it meant to carry the weight of the Apache legacy. And as the day of battle approached, the young woman stood once again at the front of the warriors. The sun rose, casting its light over the land, and she felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the heartbeat of the Apache people in her blood. This was her fight, her responsibility, and she would lead her people to victory. The land had chosen her, the tribe had chosen her, and now, she would choose to protect them with everything she had. The battle had raged for hours, the cries of warriors and the clash of weapons echoing across the land. The young woman stood in the heart of the fray, her bow in hand and her heart steady, guided by the lessons she had learned from the Apache tribe. She had fought with strength and skill, leading the tribe as they had prepared for this moment. But now, as the enemy's forces began to retreat, a deep silence settled over the battlefield. The warriors stood victorious, but the weight of the moment hung in the air. The young woman's body was tired, her limbs heavy from the fight, but she could feel the pulse of the land beneath her, the heartbeat of her ancestors coursing through her. She had chosen this path, not just as a warrior, but as a protector of the tribe and their way of life. She had stood strong in the face of danger, and now, the Apache had emerged victorious once more. As the smoke cleared, the warriors gathered around their leader, the young woman who had guided them through the storm. She could see the pride in their eyes, the respect they held for her, and in that moment, she understood what it meant to lead. It wasn't just about being strong on the battlefield, it was about understanding the land, the people, and the heart of the Apache spirit. The chief approached her, his face filled with pride and admiration. "You have done more than we could have asked," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet reverence. "You have led our people to victory, and in doing so, you have proven yourself as a true leader." The young woman bowed her head in respect, but inside, she felt a quiet peace. She had done what she set out to do. She had fought for her people, for her land, and for the future of the Apache. The battle was over, but the war for their survival was never truly finished. The chief placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with the weight of the tribe's history. "Now, you will carry the spirit of the Apache with you. The land has chosen you, and the tribe has chosen you. But you must carry that responsibility with honor, and you must protect it for the future of our people." The young woman nodded, her heart full of gratitude and determination. She had found her place, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. She had learned the strength of her people and the strength of the land that had given them everything. And with that, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed, the Apache began to rebuild. The warriors who had fought by her side took their place in the tribe, their respect for her evident in every action. They worked together to heal the wounds of the battle, to restore their homes, and to honor the spirits of those who had fallen. The young woman continued her leadership, not just through strength, but through wisdom and compassion. She spoke with the elders, listened to their stories, and learned from their knowledge. She guided the younger warriors, teaching them not only the skills of battle, but also the deeper values of the Apache way of life. The future of the tribe was in her hands now, but she knew that it was not hers to control alone. It was a shared responsibility, one that involved every member of the tribe. The young woman had always been a part of the Apache, but now, she truly understood what that meant. It was not just about survival. It was about living with honor, with respect for the land, and with the strength to protect those you love. The Apache way of life was built on the wisdom of generations, and now, she was a part of that legacy. As the seasons changed, the young woman stood on the edge of the camp, looking out over the land that had become her home. The horizon stretched before her, endless and full of promise. She had come a long way from the frightened girl who had been buried under the snow, struggling to survive. Now, she was a woman of strength, wisdom, and leadership. The land had chosen her, the tribe had chosen her, and now, she had chosen herself. And with that, she felt the peace that only comes when you truly understand your place in the world. The Apache were a people of endurance, of resilience, and of honor. They had faced many challenges, and they would face many more. But as long as they stood together, as long as they honored the land and each other, they would endure. The young woman turned back to the camp, her heart full of pride and gratitude for the life she had found. The future was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She would fight for it, and she would lead her people with the strength of the Apache spirit. The journey was far from over, but she was ready. She had proven herself, and now, it was time to lead the Apache into the future, just as her ancestors had done before her.